Welcome back to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. For those who are new, we are studying Sri Aurobindo's book, The Synthesis of Yoga, that brings the distilled essence of all the yogic traditions of India and gives the core principles and gives the new synthesized approach called integral yoga. So in this book, we are now in part 1, which is dedicated to yoga of divine works. And we are starting with this episode, the chapter 7. We will be going line by line, and reading Sri Aurobindo is a practice in itself because he is established in that divine consciousness, and from there he has written this. That means the structure of his thought, when we are able to imbibe it, it in a way reformats our brain. It makes it capable of receiving that integral vision. So this very act of reading line by line itself is a sadhana. So I would highly recommend you to have this book with you and go through the lines so that we internalize his rhythm of thought and the vision he is bringing in. The link to this chapter will be in the description. Chapter 7, it is called The Standards of Conduct and Spiritual Freedom. Every society has its standard of conduct. Every organization also develops its standards of conduct, policies that regulates human behavior. Now, these policies, standards of conduct, they are continuously evolving with time. What was okay at one point of time will not be acceptable another point of time. There's an evolution of the standards of conduct happening. And the soul's evolution is moving towards absolute spiritual freedom. Since we find ourselves to be within the social context with certain codes of conduct, we will experience this struggle, this conflict between the rules and regulations of the society in which we live and the freedom that we seek. And there is this evolutionary journey of society. And in this chapter, Sri Aurobindo goes into details of different types of codes of conduct and ultimately what is the solution, the limitations of these codes of conduct, and ultimately what is the solution towards which we need to move. And since this is whole part dealing with karma yoga, yoga of divine works, our actions come into picture. And actions are bound by the laws of codes of conduct within the society. So that's the problem we will be diving into. I'm starting with paragraph number 1. The knowledge on which the doer of works in yoga has to found all his action and development has for the keystone of its structure a more and more concrete perception of unity, the living sense of an all-pervading oneness. He moves in the increasing consciousness of all existence as an indivisible whole. All work, too, is part of this divine indivisible whole. That's a full sentence. So this is the context of karma yoga. Doer of works in yoga. We experience ourselves to be the doers of work. This is our direct, human, undeniable, experiential sense. I am the doer. the doer of the works in yoga has to found all his action and development. Action and development. There is a developmental journey, development of consciousness, growth of consciousness unfolding through our action. All action are directed towards that inner growth. Yes, in our normal life, actions are directed towards development of our material life and its concerns, vital life, its concerns, mental life, its concerns. But as the spiritual awakens, then we are looking at action from the point of view of developing that spiritual growth or growth of consciousness. So he has to found all his action and development has for the keystone of his structure. Keystone of his structure. It's a beautiful image. Keystone is used in making of the arch. When you look at old architecture, medieval times, architecture extensively used arches. Across the world, arches are very, very common. In arch, two sides are coming together and there is a stone kept at the center that locks the two parts together and forms the structure. Keystone, that single stone is very, very critical in the structural stability and locking of the two halves into one single arch. And the weight of that keystone locks them all together under the force of gravity and it becomes a solid, stable structure. So in our inner growth of consciousness, Sri Aurobindo is using that imagery, keystone of its structure. Our approach to Karma Yoga and growth through Karma Yoga, development through Karma Yoga requires a keystone. That keystone is a more and more concrete perception of unity, concrete perception of unity. Now, this perception is not natural to us. Our cognitive system perceives, experiences ourselves to be separate from everything. Not only we are separate, the nature that we experience is experienced as made of parts. Animals, birds, human beings, trees, rocks, rivers, mountains, all separate things composed together into an ecosystem. But our experience of this is of this separation. We do not have a sense of unity. And this is something that we need to consciously cultivate. Concrete perception of unity. The living sense of an all-pervading oneness. Yes, we are not able to perceive or experience oneness. Oneness is for us still a proposition, hypothesis, speculation for the human mind. But it has to install this as a way of looking at things. Everything is nothing but one consciousness, one being. That's the keystone that gradually molds the perception to make it increasingly visible. So a concrete perception of unity, the living sense of an all-pervading oneness. He moves in the increasing consciousness of all existence as an indivisible whole, the entire existence as an indivisible. For our perception, it is divided, but there is an underlying indivisible whole, which we need to gradually tune into, train our perception to see, in fact, develop our cognitive system to experience. When that is emerging, there we begin to see all work too is part of this divine indivisible whole. So all work, our individual work, work as group, work as a nation, or entire humanity, the whole thing is essentially part of a one indivisible whole. It is that one whole that is acting through these individuals, even when we are experiencing ourselves to be separate. So the transition we have to make, the keystone is this perception, the knowledge on which the doer of works in yoga has to found all his action and development, has for the keystone of its structure a more and more concrete perception of unity, the living sense of an all-pervading oneness. He moves in the increasing consciousness of all existence as an indivisible whole. All work too is part of this divine indivisible whole. This is something that we need to meditate on when we are looking at the world and its endless activities, our own action within that context, to deeply meditate. It is an indivisible whole, and it's amazing to even meditate on the idea of that indivisible whole, which is playing as this multiplicity. Just look at the street. Go to a city, look at a street, hundreds of things moving all around, the chaos. Be there, meditate on it as if it is just one thing moving as multiplicity. People experience actually to shift the perception intentionally by choice, to see that it is one thing, and to also see that you are part of that one thing. And that one being is standing there and looking out through your eyes. Keneshitam patati prekshitam manaha. The Kenopanishad would say, propelled by whom my mind is falling upon its objects. So there is a one who is presiding over everything, looking out through you. And you're looking at the multiplicity and meditating on that one being who has become all this, including you. So this line from Sri Aurobindo become very deep meditative experience. The keystone of our work and development through work is this perception. His personal action and its results can no longer be or seem a separate movement, mainly or entirely determined by the egoistic free will of an individual himself separate in the mass. So this is the condition. Ego is essentially the experience that I am separate from the rest. It is a separative consciousness, and it is a limitation of our cognitive system. And this binds us, it limits us. It's very, very real. And yet, it can be gradually dissolved. And it is a condition. And this whole sense of free will coming from the ego perceiving itself to be separate from the rest and acting as a separate individual in the world, this is a very, very undeniable experience to us. Yet, it is an illusion. So, his personal action and its results, every action has its result. And ego is looking at, when I do this, what is the result I get? I is always the center of reference for the ego. And all my personal experiences are gathered and built into this personality called I, centered around this body. And that is ego, narrow, limited perception. So his personal action and its results can no longer be or seem a separate movement, mainly or entirely determined by the egoistic free will of an individual, himself separate in the mass. There is a mass of people, in which I am separate and I am figuring out the consequences of my action as a separate individual. I don't experience myself as part of the larger whole. And that is a prison of consciousness. This we need to overcome. And in order to overcome, we need to develop that keystone, which is the sense of unity, of the indivisible whole and multiplicity playing and seeing the oneness behind. That will be the keystone. And we can no longer limit ourselves within this framework of ego sense and its notion of free will. Our works are part of an indivisible cosmic action. They are put, or more accurately, put themselves into their place in the whole, out of which they arise, and their outcome is determined by forces that overpass us. Our works are part of an indivisible cosmic action. The action is cosmic. It's not even limited to the earth. It is cosmic. Though we, human individual, experience it as my tiny little action, essentially it is a cosmic action. We are part of a cosmic action. Not even terrestrial in terms of limited to earth. It is larger cosmic existence expressing itself on earth. On earth, out of all the species, we, the human beings, within human beings, you have become conscious and experiencing yourself as something separate from where the waking up happens. Our works are part of an indivisible cosmic action. They are put, or more accurately, put themselves into their place in the whole. Put themselves into their place in the whole. There is this larger whole in which a particular action is unfolding. It is arising out of that whole and it's acting within the whole. So put themselves into their place in the whole out of which they arise. And their outcome is determined by forces that overpass us. Us here is we, the individual human beings. We are not aware of the larger forces of cosmic action, acting through nature, because of our limitation in perception. There are these larger forces that are moving the multiplicity, large currents through society, which moves thousands of people in its large winds of movement. And those movements overpass us. We don't sense their movements. Just like when we are looking at an ocean, we see the waves on the surface. But within the ocean, there are vast currents that are moving across the continents and circulating all over the planet, which is not visible to our human eye. What we see is that surface level wave and identify with one wave and experience that I am that little one. But there are these vaster currents of the whole, which is overpassing our range of perception. So our works are part of an indivisible cosmic action. They are put, or more accurately, put themselves into their place in the whole, out of which they arise, and their outcome is determined by forces that overpass us. So there is an outcome for every action. And that outcome is determined by the forces that overpass us. But our experience is, I am the doer, and we have a very, very limited, narrow notion of what is the outcome, because we are seeing it from an extremely narrow window. The world action in its vast totality and in every petty detail is the indivisible movement of the one who manifests himself progressively in the cosmos. The world action. action that is encompassing the entire world in its vast totality and in every petty detail. So this action is not just the vast movement embracing the whole, but also the every petty detail, from the tiniest particles popping up out of emptiness, out of the vast ocean of energy, becoming the tiny subatomic particles, to atoms, to molecules, to cells, to species, to ecosystems. The whole thing, from the whole to the tiniest detail, pettiest, smallest detail, is the indivisible movement of the one who manifests himself. One here with a capital O, conscious being, the Purusha, the one who is manifesting himself progressively in the cosmos. Here, when we say himself, whether it is male body, female body, body type, gender type, doesn't really matter. The pure consciousness, the Purusha, is referred here as he, and it's manifesting in the cosmos, this whole cosmos of which solar system is a part, Earth is a part. On Earth, there is the evolution unfolding, and we as individuals have woken up and we are becoming aware of this journey. And in us, what is manifesting is that one, not just in us, on Earth, that one being is progressively manifesting. And that's the whole journey of evolution. That world action in its vast totality and in every petty detail is the indivisible movement of the one who manifests himself progressively in the cosmos. Man too becomes progressively conscious of the truth of himself and the truth of things, in proportion as he awakens to this one within him and outside him, and to the occult, miraculous, and significant process of its forces in the motion of nature. There is the motion of nature. We see nature's vast movements that we experience as seasons, cycles, vast currents, which is objectively outside, which is also subjectively inside us. Our movements of thoughts, emotions, sensations, impulses, all that are part of movements of nature. It is simultaneously acting through entire humanity, all the life forms, all the material forms. It is simultaneously acting. It is occult. Occult means it is not visible to our normal perception. It is beyond, it's veiled, it is hidden. There is a miraculous, significant process of that unfolding movement, in which there is this waking up. In the Prakriti, in nature, there is the Purusha waking up, the conscious being, the soul waking up, the pure consciousness waking up. And this is a progressive awakening. And the individuals who are waking up, it is this large cosmic being who is waking up in the individual, but individual is still not aware of that larger cosmic existence because of our limitation in perception that binds to this body and limited notion of I, me, myself, my limited free will, my little action, its a limited consequence, etc. So man too becomes progressively conscious of the truth of himself and the truth of things in proportion as he awakens to this one within him. So it is in proportion to as we awaken to the one within us, this perception will deepen within us and outside. So it is simultaneously working from within in our subjective experience, and in our objective world, it is simultaneously operating everywhere. And this we become progressively aware in proportion to we become conscious. outside him, and to the occult, miraculous, significant processes of its forces in the motion of nature. So this one who is also behind all the motions of nature. Nature is the manifest body of this one conscious being who is manifesting progressively. This action, this movement is not confined even in ourselves and those around us to the little fragmentary portion of the cosmic activities of which we are in our superficial consciousness are aware. It is supported by an immense underlying environing existence subliminal to our minds or subconscious, and it is attracted by an immense transcending existence which is superconscious to our nature. So there are many keywords coming here: subliminal, subconscious, transcending existence, superconscious, all that. That refers back to the broad structure Sri Aurobindo has given. We have our normal wakeful state. Behind it, there is subliminal consciousness. Below, there is subconscious, and above is superconscious that transcends our current state. So these are the broad regions of consciousness. It is superconscient in relationship with our wakeful state. Subconscious is what is below, and subliminal is what is behind. So these regions supports from all around what we have as our individual conscious wakeful existence, which is at something very, very narrow. It is a very superficial consciousness, just like a wave on the surface of the ocean. So this action, this movement is not confined even in ourselves and those around us. This action is the action of the larger cosmic whole. This action, this movement is not confined even in ourselves and those around us to the little fragmentary portion of the cosmic activities. Action and activities are cosmic, but we are experiencing it as a tiny fragment within our individual life, of which we in our superficial consciousness are aware. It is supported by an immense underlying environing existence. This tiny little activity that we are experiencing as ours in our wakeful state is supported by an immense underlying environing existence subliminal to our minds. From our wakeful state, it is subliminal or subconscious, and it is attracted by an immense transcending existence which is superconscious to our nature. So there are two movements. On one hand, it is supported, our individual consciousness is supported by that which is subliminal or subconscious. On one hand, this is supporting from the vast surrounding consciousness ocean. On the other hand, there is the transcending consciousness that is superconscious, which is attracting like a magnet. That is our evolutionary future above our limited consciousness, which is gently attracting like a magnet this tiny little individual who is ready for such an evolution. That's the movement in consciousness animating the evolutionary process. We subjectively experience it as attraction, fascination towards something that is calling our attention, an inner call to explore an adventure. So there is a magnetic attraction by something, and that something is this profound consciousness of the one being pervading everything, everywhere. And it has a poise that is transcending, which is superconscious. From there, it attracts. On one hand, it attracts from above. On the other hand, it is supporting from all around as subliminal or subconscious. So let's read this line once again. This action, this movement is not confined even in ourselves and those around us to the little fragmentary portion of the cosmic activities of which we, in our superficial consciousness, are aware. It is supported by an immense underlying environing existence, subliminal to our minds or subconscious, and it is attracted by an immense transcending existence which is superconscious to our nature. So we can visualize this sentence like a vast ocean in which there is a wave happening. That is our tiny little activity, a tiny little wave, which is supported by a vast subliminal consciousness behind and a subconscious below. And above there is this vast formless sky, which is superconscient, which is formless from our normal wakeful consciousness, which is attracting this upward and supported from all around, because it is all pervasive. It is above, it is below, it is behind, it is holding you from all around. You are in the embrace of that one conscious being, one existence, and you're slowly becoming conscious of its surrounding existence, its superconscious existence, its support and its attraction. These are two movements. It is attracting you, and at the same time it is supporting you from all around. Our action arises as we ourselves have emerged out of a universality of which we are not aware. We give it a shape by our personal temperament, personal mind and will of thought, or force of impulse or desire. But the true truth of things, the true law of action, exceeds these personal and human formations. We have emerged in nature. Now, out of us, our actions are arising. So think of it kind of a telescopic setting. There is the vast cosmic action, cosmic nature. Out of that whole solar system emerged, out of that whole earth emerged, and on earth, human beings emerged. Within human being, there is the individual action of the human being emerging. And the individual is assuming that it is my action. And we experience it that way. There is an individualized color to it. Just like our fingerprint is unique. So there is a unique individualized action unfolding through us, but original sources of that one large action. Our action arises as we ourselves have emerged out of a universality of which we are not aware. There is the universality in which we exist, of which we are not aware. We are not aware. We give it a shape. So here we have that sense of freedom of doing things. I am shaping things. I am shaping the destiny of a group of people. I am shaping the destiny of my society. I am shaping the destiny of my nation. I am shaping the destiny of human evolution. These are the kind of perceptions human being is capable, depending upon to what degree his consciousness has widened, opened up. And we experience that I am shaping. We give it a shape by our personal temperament. The capacity of the instrument and its particular temperament is giving a particular formation to the action of a universal action, getting customized through an individual mold, which is our action. We give it a shape by our personal temperament. So someone who is habituated to be calm and quiet, the forces act through the person as that calm and quiet vast action. Whereas someone who is restless, compulsive, raging, the vast cosmic action will be acting through that individual as that raging, compulsive, restless action. Both are coming from the same source, but it is given that particular color by the temperament of that particular individual. Personal temperament, personal mind, and will of thought. There is a personal mind to the individual. On one hand, the mind is universal, but there is a customized version, a custom software of the universal software, our individual mind, and the will of thought. Will of thought. Thought has a will, and perception is directing our action. Our thought is directing through its intelligent will or force of impulse or desire. So below this intelligent will, there is force of impulse or desire. That is also what we constantly experience. There are impulses, desires, these are all acting through us, and we experience them as ours. But the true truth of things, the true law of action exceeds these personal and human formations. The real truth exceeds these human formations. The larger action is flowing through us, but human being gives it a human formation. But the greater truth exceeds our perception. Our actions arises as we ourselves have emerged out of a universality of which we are not aware. We give it a shape by our personal temperament, personal mind, and will of thought, or force of impulse or desire. But the true truth of things, the true law of action, exceeds these personal and human formations. So that which exceeds us, that one conscious being, all-pervasive, Isha Vasyamidam Sarva, that has to be our meditation, continuous dwelling of the mind. That is the keystone that will mold our mind to eventually develop the capacity to perceive that one being. Every standpoint, every man-made rule of action, which ignores the indivisible totality of the cosmic movement, whatever its utility in external practice, is, to the eye of the spiritual truth, an imperfect view and law of the ignorance. So now we are coming to the question or the perception or the view of action and the codes of conduct, rules that we create. We have a perception that here is my little individual action and here is my society, and people are interacting, and some behaviors are not okay, some behaviors are okay. Accordingly, I begin to create rules for the society. Now, these rules, no matter how refined they are, it will be insufficient and incapable if it is not seen from that larger vision of the cosmic movement. When it ignores the larger cosmic movement, it is bound to be narrow and limited. So every standpoint, every man-made rule of action, individuals will define for themselves, consciously or unconsciously, what is my rule of conduct. Many things we inherit from society and follow unconsciously, like customs, traditions, moral concepts, ethics, all that. Then there are government laws. Then the courts and justice system to give justice to people, and the police and army to defend, protect, all that. There is a set of rules within a society that guides a particular society. Every man-made rule of action which ignores the indivisible totality of the cosmic movement. So the man-made rule, when it is ignoring the cosmic movement, whatever its utility in external practice, these man-made rules may have some practical utility. Whatever its utility in external practice is, to the eye of spiritual truth, when our consciousness liberates itself into spiritual truth. When we see from that angle, that is when we get the eye of the spiritual truth. Till then, we have the normal human eye of ignorance. We have not liberated. Behind the eye, who is the seer? Seer behind the seer. To the eye of the spiritual truth, all these limited man-made rules are, no matter how much practical utility is there, that's an imperfect view and a law of the ignorance. It will be a law of ignorance, avidya, because we are creating rules based on ignorance, because we do not have perception. So when we are defining rules by seeing a tiny portion, it is bound to be narrow, limited, and ignorant. Every standpoint, every man-made rule of action, which ignores the indivisible totality of the cosmic movement, whatever its utility in external practice, is to the eye of the spiritual truth, an imperfect view and a law of the ignorance. Law of the ignorance. This is where we normally live. Our life is bound by the law of ignorance, self-made rules, made by the family, made by the society, made by the government. There are rules and rules and rules and rules and regulations everywhere, spoken, unspoken, written, unwritten. But these are all laws of ignorance when they ignore the cosmic perspective. Even when we have arrived at some glimpse of this idea or succeeded in fixing it in our consciousness, and a knowledge of the mind and a consequent attitude of the soul, it is difficult for us in our outward parts and active nature to square accounts between this universal standpoint and the claims of our personal opinion, our personal will, our personal emotion and desire. So on one hand is the keystone, the perception of the oneness, larger picture, that is to be established. And Sri Aurobindo is giving that sequence of that establishment. When we have arrived at some glimpse of this idea of that cosmic action by the one conscious being, some glimpse of this conscious idea, or succeeded in fixing it in our consciousness. Either we get a glimpse or we are fixing it in our consciousness. Our consciousness, our human consciousness, wakeful state is always in flux. Ideas come and go, perceptions come and go. Nothing is stable. Some become stable, and that which becomes stable become our identity, our view of the world, out of all that is streaming through our consciousness. And within that stream, when we begin to get a glimpse of this keystone, that is the universal oneness, one being, one existence acting through all, when we get a glimpse, or when that glimpse gets fixed in our consciousness as a knowledge of the mind, the mind gets it as a knowledge. First is conceptual knowledge, gradually moving towards experiential knowledge, and a consequent attitude of the soul. So here, journey is reverse. We are coming from our state of the mental being. We are mental beings. Soul is deeply hidden. And mind is waking up. Soul in the mind is gradually waking up. And when the knowledge is settled in the mind, everything is one. Isha vasyam idam sarvam. Once that settles. And as a result, the soul itself is having that attitude. That consequent attitude of the soul. Soul, not the deepest. Here it will be the outer soul in the mind acquiring that attitude. So even when we have arrived at some glimpse of this idea or succeeded in fixing it in our consciousness as a knowledge of the mind and a consequent attitude of the soul, it is difficult for us in our outward parts and active nature. There is our outward parts and active nature to square accounts between this universal standpoint and the claims of our personal opinion, our personal will, our personal emotion and desire. The squaring accounts. Here is where there is a subjective experience that is screaming at us, saying, look, I am separate. I am experiencing this pain because of this person, this situation, that situation that is separate from me. And I am trying my best. In spite of all that, I am going through these challenges. Therefore, how can there be this one? So these two doesn't really square accounts. On one hand, we want to deeply enter into that experience of oneness, and other side, our outer nature, body, senses, sensations, emotions, all they are reacting, responding as if there is this clear separation, and contacts, encounters are often painful, difficult. So, in our outward part and active nature, to square accounts between this universal standpoint and the claims of our personal opinion, our personal will, our personal emotion and desire, we are forced still to go on dealing with this indivisible movement as if it were a mass of impersonal material out of which we, the ego, the person, have to carve something according to our own will and mental fantasy by a personal struggle and effort. Our individual lives have this sense of struggle and effort. So there is this mass of impersonal existence appearing as this thousands of people, network of people, organizations, marketplaces, families, and this and that, out of which this little individual, I, me, and myself, have to carve something out of it with struggle of individual will, effort. That is the experience we as individuals carry. We are forced still to go on dealing with this indivisible movement. So even when we have mentally developed this attitude that everything is one, still we are forced still to go on dealing with this indivisible movement as if it were a mass of impersonal material. It is impersonal material out of which we, the ego, the person, the little individual, have to carve something according to our own will and mental fantasy. There is our limited individual will and there is a mental fantasy, a limited perception of what life is, what success is, what progress is. And we are struggling towards that progress, that success, that vision of life purpose. And there is a little individual will striving for it according to whatever little mental fantasy, according to our own will and mental fantasy by a personal struggle and effort. There is a personal struggle and effort. That is reality. We cannot deny that this is where we are and that's where we start our journey. And in that struggle, we have to deal with the social codes of conduct. This is man's normal attitude towards his environment. Actually false because our ego and its will are creations and puppets of the cosmic forces. And it is only when we withdraw from ego into the consciousness of the divine knowledge will of the eternal, who acts in them, that we can be, by a sort of deputation from above, their master. We struggle to master our environing nature, whether it is material nature, forces of nature mastering it, or mastering the market forces, people, their likes, dislikes, preferences. An individual is constantly dealing with other individuals, other life forms, and there is a battle to master things. And that mastery cannot come until we are able to free ourselves from the ego bound narrow perception and action and align with the consciousness of the divine knowledge will of the eternal. Knowledge will. It's with capital K, capital W, connecting with the hyphen. Knowledge will, where action is with that totality of awareness, knowledge. Integral knowledge and its integral force is acting. Of the eternal is acting. We do not have access to it. We experience subjectively our knowledge and will are separate. Sometimes we know, but we cannot do what we know. Sometimes we do many things, but we do not know what I am doing. Knowledge and will act as two separate streams. In divine consciousness, knowledge will is one. And that too, which is cosmic. And from there, the action arises. Whereas we humans act from this fractured nature of the ego, where there is a will acting on its own, there is knowledge struggling to get understanding of the world, and very rarely they come together. This is man's normal attitude towards his environment actually falls because our ego and its will are creations and puppets of cosmic forces. And it is only when we withdraw from ego into the consciousness of the divine knowledge will of the eternal, who acts in them, that we become by a sort of deputation from above their master. So when we withdraw from the ego and align with that knowledge will of the divine, eternal, then by a deputation, that has given you the deputation, your delegate here, and bring certain mastery from that voice. It is essentially mastery coming from the master of existence, the Lord of the sacrifice. From where comes the mastery? It is not the mastery by the ego. Ego has the struggle and limited way of dealing with the forces. It is a puppet of larger cosmic forces. So when this puppet detaches and discovers the true master, then the puppet itself becomes a delegate, a conscious instrument working in alignment with the divine will. And yet, is this personal position, the right attitude for man, so long as he cherishes his individuality and has not yet fully developed it? For without this viewpoint and motive force, he cannot grow in his ego, cannot sufficiently develop and differentiate himself out of the subconscious or half-conscious universal mass existence. Yet is this personal position the right attitude for man, so long as he cherishes his individuality and has not yet fully developed it. So there is individuality to be developed. We are part of our collective life. A collective life which is subconscious or half-conscious, a universal mass existence. That's what he is saying. And we have to differentiate ourselves and become this tiny little individual, even if it is ego. So nature is, through her evolutionary process, creating species first, and that's a one mass consciousness. Out of that, within a species, human species, we individuals are able to differentiate ourselves and become an individual ego. And this is a very, very important evolutionary stage, becoming that individualized ego. Ego individualization, who feels I am separate and I have an individual will and I have an individual self-awareness, awareness about the environment, and I become an explorer and I am struggling to master the nature. It is a necessary stage and part of the journey. It is not something that is bad in itself. It is part of the process, and that's a stage that we all go through. And when we wake up, we find ourselves to be that tiny little ego that has become separate from the mass consciousness. So, and yet, is this personal position the right attitude for man so long as he cherishes his individuality and has not yet fully developed it? We have to develop fully that individuality. For without this viewpoint and motive force, he cannot grow in his ego, cannot sufficiently develop and differentiate himself out of the subconscious or half-conscious universal mass existence. So with my little individuality, my little will, my little knowledge, I will struggle and learn to master. That is legitimate for the development of the ego. It is when we are transcending the ego, we are looking at, okay, my action is actually not separate. There is a larger cosmic force, cosmic being, who is acting through everyone, and I am only a projection from it, a delegate from it. That becomes legitimate when we are transcending the ego. Prior to that, when we are differentiating from the mass consciousness, that struggle with the environment is a legitimate, with the individual will, individual ego, individual knowledge, individual impulses, all that is legitimate because nature is forging an individual out of the universal mass existence. And yet, is this personal position the right attitude for man so long as he cherishes his individuality and has not yet fully developed it? For without this viewpoint and motive force, he cannot grow in his ego, that I am separate. That's the perception nature has created. It is part of the game design. And that viewpoint and motive force, he cannot grow in his ego, cannot sufficiently develop and differentiate himself out of the subconscious or half-conscious universal mass existence. But the hold of this ego consciousness upon the whole habit of existence is difficult to shake off when we have no longer need of the separative, the individualistic and aggressive stage of development. When we would proceed forward from this necessity of littleness of the child soul to unity and universality, to the cosmic consciousness and beyond, to our transcendent spirit stature. Child soul. So that's the early stage where child soul has to forge out this ego sense, which is separative, individualistic and aggressive stage of development. This is where the aggression is, to assert oneself, to impose oneself on others. That's part of the developmental stage of the ego, when the child soul is still forming and shaping the outer individual. So that is part of the journey. But that once forged, it becomes something difficult to shake off when time comes for us to move beyond this littleness, to move towards unity and universality. Because now I have to move from the sense of separation, sense of individuality, to unity and universality. That is dissolving the sense of the separate me into a vaster existence of universal being. Not only that, then to cosmic consciousness and beyond. In universality, we spread into the entire humanity and earth existence. From there, we liberate further into cosmic consciousness and then beyond to our transcendent spirit stature, beyond all time and space, beyond all this material existence, into the transcendent state. So from the movement is from the mass consciousness, the individual ego is forged, the individuality is forged, and from there we dissolve that individual ego and enter into unity and universality, and from the universality liberate into cosmic consciousness, further liberate into transcendent spirit structure. So that's a whole movement of expansion. The hold of this ego consciousness upon our whole habit of existence is difficult to shake off when we have no longer need of the separative, individualistic and aggressive stage of development, when we would proceed forward from this necessity of littleness in the child soul to unity and universality, to the cosmic consciousness and beyond, to our transcendent spirit stature. So all these are different stages and there are necessities. Formation of the individual ego, separate sense, was a part of the necessity, is part of the game design of the Leela. It is indispensable to recognize clearly, not only in our mode of thought, but in our way of feeling, sensing, doing, that this movement, this universal action, is not helpless impersonal wave of being which lends itself to the will of any ego according to that ego's strength and insistence. Very interesting distinction coming here. When we are surrendering from our individual ego, we can potentially surrender to another ego, whether it is a larger powerful person's ego or a group ego. All that are possible. So it is indispensable to recognize clearly, not only in our mode of thought, but in our way of feeling, sensing, doing. Feeling, sensing, doing. That this movement, this universal action, so we are shifting from the individualized ego towards unity and universality. In that space, we need to clearly recognize in our mode of thought, but in our, not only in our mode of thought, in our way of feeling, sensing and doing, that this movement, this universal action is not a helpless impersonal wave of being. A helpless impersonal wave of being, impersonal wave of being, which lends itself to the will of any ego according to that ego's strength and insistence. So we are, if we depersonalize ourselves, becoming an impersonal, anything goes kind of space, I am not there, and then if that space, that conscious being is lifted up and picked up by another ego and its strength and insistence, then we are missing the whole point. So surrendering to whom? Who is carrying you forward? Is it another ego? Very critical question, very important thing to always meditate upon. We can very easily fantasize that I have dissolved my ego, surrendered to the divine will. But is it really divine will? This is the golden question. We have to, it is indispensable to recognize clearly only, not only in our mode of thought, but in our way of feeling, sensing and doing. We have to feel, sense in our action. Who is acting? Who is sensing? Who is feeling? Who is thinking through us? Is it the divine or various ego formations of nature within in the society? So it is indispensable to recognize clearly, not only in our mode of thought, but in our way of feeling, sensing, doing, that this movement, this universal action is not a helpless impersonal wave of being which lends itself to the will of any ego according to that ego's strength and insistence. It is the movement of a cosmic being who is the knower of this field, Kshetra, Kshetrajna of the Gita. Kshetra is the field, the knower of the field is the cosmic being. It is the movement of a cosmic being who is the knower of this his field, the stages of a divinity, the steps of a divinity who is the master of his own progressive force of action. Progressive force of action from the universal cosmic being. There is the projection into time and space or into this worldly action. The force, the progressive force unfolding in the world, it's divine action. It is the movement of a cosmic being who is the knower of his field, the steps of a divinity who is the master of his own progressive force of action. As the movement is one and indivisible, so he who is present in the movement is one soul and indivisible. So this movement is indivisible, so is the person who is indivisible. Whether it is looking at the movement from the perspective of this body or another person or third person or fourth person or larger social movement, it is one being. It has to arrive at that perception. Then only we can truly come in touch with that divine consciousness. As the movement is one and indivisible, so he who is present in the movement is one soul and indivisible. Not only all results is determined by him, but all initiation, action and process are dependent on the motion of his cosmic force and only belong secondarily and in their form to the creature. At this point, it is very good to recall the imagery from the Rig Veda, 10th mandala, the Purusha Sukta, Sahasra Shirsha Purusha Sahasraksha Sahasrapat Sabhumim Vishwato Vritva Atyatishtaddashangulam. 1,000-headed Purusha. It's describing the one being who is looking out through thousands of these creatures. It is one being with 1,000 arms, 1,000 legs. Here 1,000 is not to be taken literally. It is representing that multiplicity of beings. But it is that one being who is looking out through all and acting through all. And who is the initiator of the action and the one who sets the process in motion, who is so primarily that's the source, and only in secondarily in their form it is the creature who is the one who is delivering it here in our world. So not only the all result is determined by him, that cosmic Purusha, but all initiation, action and process are dependent on the motion of his cosmic force. Everything is dependent on this cosmic being and only belongs secondarily in their form to the creature. Creature, we individuals are the one who are experiencing as separate beings, the creatures here in action. But the cosmic being initiates, directs, and we experience it as our individual action. There is a personal temperament mold that colors the action, but we are instruments through which this vast cosmic being is acting. So this is the picture that we need to contemplate and hold continuously. Isha Vasyam Idam Sarvam. There is one cosmic being. In our Karma Yoga perspective, I am acting. This action, from where does it come? It comes from the cosmic being. And this action is unfolding in the world, and there is the vast action of the cosmic being permeating everyone and everything, unfolding. But our individual mold is giving its form and color and temperament, and we experience it as ours. And during the development stage of the ego, it is a necessary part where we become conscious. We differentiate ourselves from the unconscious mass movement, become conscious, and realign with the divine will who is omnipresent, omnipotent. That's the work we need to do. And it is in that space we will be now looking into the various standards of conduct and its role in this picture. That we will take up in our next episode. With this, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you for being with me in this journey, and please do share your meditations of this cosmic being of which you are a part, and this whole sense of I am a separate actor struggling in this world, and even this whole experience of watching, listening to this podcast as you are sitting there on the other side, I am sitting here on this side, even separated in time as well as space, and to just contemplate that it is one being who is sitting as two and playing this game. There is no separation between us. The speaker and the listener and this whole experience, everything is just that one movement. But our individualized consciousness do not have that experience. But the promise is we can move towards it. And in order to move towards it, we don't have to get rid of our daily life activities. And it is in that very activity itself become the ground of meditation. The keystone of the arch. Ishavasyam idam sarvam. There is one being, one cosmic existence permeating everything. It is moving everything. From there is origination of the sanction. Knowledge will of the divine flowing through. And as we become empty ourselves, we can open to that force. And the distortion that happens through our individuality can be reduced so that the divine light and force can act and flow through. Thank you. See you next week.